On July 22, 1991, just hours after the tragic encounter with synthesomphone, Dahmer claimed his final victim when he lured 31-year-old Joseph Bradehoft to his apartment. This latest crime would prove to be the one that finally exposed his activities, as the accumulation of evidence and the overwhelming smell made it impossible for him to continue his charade. The victim was found under circumstances that made it clear that Dahmer's control over his situation was completely unraveling. The discovery that would finally bring down Jeffrey Dahmer came in the most unexpected way. On the evening of July 22, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards found himself handcuffed in Dahmer's apartment after being lured there under the pretense of watching movies and having some drinks. Edwards had initially been charmed by Dahmer's quiet demeanor and apparent loneliness, but as the evening progressed, he realized that something was terribly wrong. The apartment had an overwhelming smell of death, there were strange sounds coming from the bedroom, and Dahmer's behavior became increasingly erratic and controlling. When Dahmer attempted to handcuff Edwards' other hand, the intended victim made a desperate break for freedom. He managed to escape from the apartment with one handcuff still attached to his wrist, and ran into the street, flagging down police officers, Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller, at approximately 11:30 p.m. Edwards was clearly terrified, and told the officers that a weird dude had tried to hurt him, and was keeping body parts in his apartment. The officers were initially skeptical, but Edwards' obvious distress and the handcuff on his wrist convinced them to investigate further. When officers Roth and Mueller accompanied Edwards back to the Oxford apartments, they were met by Jeffrey Dahmer at the door of apartment 22. True to form, Dahmer appeared calm and cooperative, explaining that he and Edwards had simply had a misunderstanding after drinking too much. His demeanor was so convincing that the officers might have been swayed, but Edwards insisted that they look inside the apartment for evidence of his claims. Reluctantly, Dahmer allowed the officers to enter, a decision that would expose the full extent of his crimes to the world. The first indication that something was seriously wrong came when Officer Mueller opened Dahmer's refrigerator, looking for evidence of the claimed beer drinking session. Instead of finding beverages, he discovered a human head staring back at him from the top shelf. The officer immediately drew his weapon and called for backup, while Dahmer's facade finally crumbled completely. Faced with undeniable evidence, he became passive and compliant, offering no resistance as he was placed under arrest. His only words were a quiet acknowledgement, "For what I did, I should be dead." What investigators discovered in apartment 22 over the following days would shock even seasoned homicide detectives. The one-bedroom apartment contained evidence of at least 11 murders, with body parts stored in various containers throughout the living space. Photographs documenting the crimes were found carefully organized in boxes, along with detailed records that suggested Dahmer had been planning and documenting his activities for years. The level of organization and the systematic nature of the evidence indicated that these were not crimes of passion, but carefully planned and executed acts by someone who had completely lost touch with human empathy. The investigation that followed Dahmer's arrest revealed the true scope of his crimes and the remarkable fact that he had been able to continue his activities for so long without detection. Detective Dennis Murphy, who led the investigation, later described the apartment as unlike anything he had ever encountered in his 20-year career in law enforcement. The evidence suggested that Dahmer had killed 17 people over a 13-year period, with the majority of those crimes occurring in the final 4 years of his spree. As news of Dahmer's arrest spread throughout Milwaukee, the community struggled to comprehend how such horrific crimes could have been committed in their midst, without anyone realizing what was happening. The Oxford Apartments, a modest building in a working-class neighborhood, became the center of media attention as reporters and curious onlookers gathered to try to understand how Jeffrey Dahmer had been able to hide his activities for so long. The building's residents, many of whom had complained about the smells and sounds coming from apartment 22, grappled with the realization that they had been living just feet away from one of the most extensive crime scenes in American history. The psychological profile that emerged during Dahmer's interrogation painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual who had been struggling with violent fantasies and compulsions for most of his adult life. He confessed to his crimes with a disturbing matter-of-fact tone, providing detailed accounts of his methods and motivations to investigators. What became clear was that Dahmer's crimes were not random acts of violence, but the result of carefully developed fantasies about control and possession that had gradually escalated over time. During his confession, Dahmer revealed that he had been driven by a desire to create compliant companions who would never leave him, a twisted interpretation of human relationships that reflected his complete inability to form normal emotional connections with others. His crimes represented an extreme manifestation of abandonment issues and control fantasies that had been developing since his childhood. The systematic nature of his activities and his ability to maintain a facade of normalcy suggested a level of psychological compartmentalization that allowed him to function in society while committing increasingly heinous acts. The trial of Jeffrey Dahmer began in January 1992 and became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings of the decade. The central question was not whether Dahmer had committed the crimes. His confession had eliminated any doubt about his guilt, but whether he was legally insane at the time of the murders. The defense argued that no sane person could have committed such acts, while the prosecution maintained that Dahmer's careful planning and ability to avoid detection demonstrated that he knew right from wrong and was therefore legally responsible for his actions. The testimony during the trial provided the public with their first detailed look at the extent of Dahmer's crimes and the systematic nature of his activity. Forensic experts described the evidence found in apartment 30T, while psychiatrists debated Dahmer's mental state and the factors that had contributed to his transformation into a serial killer. The proceedings were particularly difficult for the families of the victims, who were forced to relive their losses, while trying to understand how their loved ones had fallen prey to such a calculating predator. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before finding Jeffrey Dahmer sane and guilty on all 15 counts of murder for which he was being tried. The verdict meant that he would face life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, effectively ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people. The families of the victims expressed relief that justice had been served, though many noted that no punishment could truly compensate for their losses or heal the trauma that Dahmer had inflicted on the community. The impact of the Dahmer case extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. The crimes exposed serious problems in the way law enforcement and social services respond to signs of potential violence, particularly when it involves marginalized communities. The failure of police officers to properly assess the situation when Konarak Sintasum phone escaped led to significant changes in training and protocols for responding to domestic disturbance calls. Additionally, the case highlighted the importance of taking community concerns seriously, as residents of the Oxford apartments had been reporting suspicious activities for months before Dahmer's arrest. Jeffrey Dahmer's killing spree also had a profound impact on Milwaukee's gay community, which had been specifically targeted by his predatory behavior. Many of his victims were young men who frequented gay bars and clubs, and the revelation that someone had been systematically hunting members of their community created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that persisted long after Dahmer's arrest. Community organizations worked to provide support for those affected by the crimes and to implement safety measures designed to protect vulnerable individuals from similar predators. The case also raised important questions about the role of mental health services in preventing violent crime. Dahmer's history of alcohol abuse, his struggles with his sexual identity, and his obvious psychological problems had been evident to those around him for years, yet he had never received the kind of intensive treatment that might have prevented his crimes. Mental health advocates used the case to highlight the need for better access to psychological services and more effective intervention strategies for individuals showing signs of violent ideation. On November 28, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer's life came to an end when he was beaten to death by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. Scarver, who was serving a life sentence for murder, later said that he had been disgusted by Dahmer's crimes and had decided to take justice into his own hands. While some viewed Dahmer's death as fitting retribution for his crimes, others argued that it represented a failure of the prison system to protect inmates, regardless of the nature of their offenses. The death of Jeffrey Dahmer marked the end of one of the most disturbing chapters in American criminal history, but the questions raised by his crimes continue to resonate today. Researchers and law enforcement officials have studied the case extensively, seeking to understand how someone could commit such acts and what warning signs might have been missed along the way. The systematic nature of Dahmer's crimes and his ability to evade detection for so long have provided valuable insights into the methods used by serial killers and the importance of taking seemingly minor complaints and concerns seriously. The legacy of the Dahmer case can be seen in the changes it prompted in law enforcement training, mental health services, and community safety protocols. Police departments across the country implemented new procedures for responding to calls involving potential domestic violence or suspicious behavior, with particular emphasis on protecting vulnerable populations. Mental health professionals developed better screening tools for identifying individuals at risk of committing violent acts, while community organizations created new programs designed to provide support and protection for those most likely to become victims of predatory behavior. Perhaps most importantly, the Jeffrey Dahmer case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of community vigilance and the need for individuals to trust their instincts when something doesn't seem right. The residents of the Oxford apartments who complained about the smells and sounds coming from apartment 213 were dismissed too easily, and their concerns were not taken seriously enough by those in authority. If their complaints had been investigated more thoroughly, or if they had been more persistent in demanding action, some of Dahmer's later victims might have been saved. The crimes committed by Jeffrey Dahmer represent one of the darkest examples of human depravity in modern American history, but they also provide important lessons about the need for vigilance, empathy, and community involvement in preventing such tragedies. The 17 young men who lost their lives to Dahmer's twisted fantasies were sons, brothers, and friends, whose potential was cut short by a predator who had learned to exploit the trust and vulnerabilities of others. Understanding how Jeffrey Dahmer was able to commit his crimes for so many years requires acknowledging the social and systemic factors that enabled his activity. His victims were often marginalized individuals who lacked strong support networks or whose disappearances were not immediately noticed by law enforcement. The intersection of homophobia, racism, and classism created an environment where certain lives were valued less than others, allowing Dahmer to continue his predatory behavior with minimal scrutiny. The investigation and prosecution of Jeffrey Dahmer also highlighted the dedication and professionalism of the law enforcement officers and legal professionals who worked tirelessly to ensure that justice was served. Detective Dennis Murphy and his team processed one of the most disturbing crime scenes in American history with thoroughness and attention to detail that ensured Dahmer could be held accountable for his actions. The prosecutors who tried the case navigated complex legal and psychological issues to secure a conviction that provided some measure of closure for the victims' families and the community. Staying safe, learning from tragedy, the horrific crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer serve as a crucial reminder that predators often hide behind masks of normalcy and charm. To protect yourself and others from becoming victims of similar crimes, it's essential to remain vigilant and trust your instinct. Never ignore that inner voice that tells you something isn't right about a person or situation, even if they seem friendly and harmless on the surface. When meeting new people, especially in social settings like bars or online platforms, always inform trusted friends or family members about your plans, including where you're going and with whom. Arrange for check-in times and stick to them. If you feel uncomfortable or unsafe at any point during an encounter, don't hesitate to leave immediately, regardless of social pressure or embarrassment. Be particularly cautious about accepting invitations to private locations, from people you've just met, no matter how genuine they may seem. Predators like Dahmer specifically target individuals who are isolated or vulnerable, often offering alcohol, drugs, money, or other incentives to lure victims to secondary locations where they have complete control. Report suspicious activities to law enforcement, even if they seem minor or you're unsure whether they constitute a real threat. The residents of Dahmer's building complained about smells and sounds for months before his arrest, but their concerns weren't taken seriously enough. Persistent, unexplained odors, unusual sounds at odd hours, or other strange behaviors from neighbors could be signs of criminal activity that warrant investigation. If you're part of marginalized communities that may be specifically targeted by predators, connect with local support organizations and safety networks. Stay informed about potential threats in your area and work with others to create systems of mutual protection and accountability. Most importantly, remember that you have the right to feel safe and to remove yourself from any situation that makes you uncomfortable, regardless of how others might react. The victims of Jeffrey Dahmer trusted when they should have been cautious and ignored warning signs that could have saved their lives. By learning from their tragedy and remaining vigilant in our daily lives, we honor their memory while protecting ourselves and our communities from those who would do us harm.